Okay guys, it is official. I am on the hunt for my next e-bike build. Based off of the feedback in the last video, you guys agreed that after 1 year, it is time to retire this bike and move on to bigger and better things, which I fully intend on doing. So for the past couple days, ever since posting that video and seeing the feedback, I've been doing research into what bike I should buy in order to facilitate these upgrades. And there's lots of qualities that make a bike good for upgrading, like the frame, if it can accept additional batteries, the suspension, right, because you can't change the geometry after buying it. So I've been looking at legit bikes like Super 73 and other recognizable brands, but I've also been looking on Alibaba and AliExpress and the more sketchy Chinese market. So far I haven't found one Chinese Alibaba bike in particular that I find amazing, but at this point in my research I have found a handful that are very interesting, unique, fascinating, different than what we're used to, and I figured at least some of you guys might want to know about them. So that's the point of today's video, to educate you guys on what China is doing with bikes in the year 2023. So it should be a fun video. I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get right into this.
Now the first official sketchy Alibaba bike is the EKX X21. And this might be the most sketchy because there's no actual image of the bike, just these CGI renders that look very unconvincing. So there's no telling exactly what you might receive if you order this, but at least on paper, I actually find this bike very compelling. So to begin, the price tag is $2,000. We have a 2,000 watt motor, a 48 volt battery with a capacity of 35 amp hours, and that gives you a total watt hour capacity of 1,680. But the real reason why I'm talking about this and bringing it to your attention is because of the geometry of the bike. It has a very close resemblance to something like the Suron or the Teleria Sting. So we have what appears to be, again, this is all just CGI, but it appears to be long travel suspension in the front, and we have an equally impressive rear shock with a good geometry. And on top of all that, we have fat tires. So on paper, you can see why I think this bike is pretty compelling for the price point. The only unfortunate thing is the sketch factor. So the hydraulic forks in the front, we don't have any kind of a brand name, we don't even see what it really looks like, but it appears that for $2,000 you have good geometry, long travel suspension, both front and back, a pretty nice battery, and an equally pretty nice motor. And even for my purposes of buying a bike with the intention of upgrading it, changing out a lot of the components, this might not be that bad of a platform for that. I can easily see adding a mid-drive motor, changing out the battery. After all, you have this nice compartment to do what you please with. You just have to contend with the sketch factor of buying a bike on AliExpress with nothing but CGI images of it. Alright, the next bike I want to show you guys is this dual 1,000 watt hub drive bike that we actually have a physical video of. So looking at this video, the first thing to note is that the aesthetics are actually, in my opinion, pretty nice looking. It's fat tire, full suspension, and it has a pretty small looking motorcycle bench seat to it. I'm also noticing hydraulic disc brakes, integrated lights, some nice features. Unfortunately, the battery isn't anything special, 48 volts, looking to be 30 amp hours. So I guess the final thing I want to say about this bike is that I do appreciate the design approach here, and I wish more bikes sold in the US looked like this. Moving on, I did save the best for last, and this is a bike that I'm actually contemplating buying for the purposes of making a really awesome YouTube video about it. So if we play the video here, initially it looks like a Super 73 inspired bike, but when you take a closer look, the components are pretty different and, in my opinion, higher quality. So the suspension fork in the front is actually a KKE suspension fork with a through axle. Almost every e-bike has older, less secure, lower quality dropouts. So a through axle is a nice improvement. Here's the fork in action. You can see a lot of travel to it. The battery isn't anything special. It's 48 volts. But this actually comes with a Bafang BBS HD mid-drive motor instead of the traditional hub motor. And if I scroll down to the images here, we can see the bike in its full glory. Again, initially it looks like a cheap Super 73 knockoff, but they're actually using nice components. That KKE front suspension fork, a mid-drive motor, even that rear shock. The geometry isn't fantastic, but that rear shock looks to be a D&M suspension component. In fact, it probably says it somewhere. Oh, it says it on the shock. This is also KKE brand. And here's a look at the other side of the bike. We have that long seat. It doesn't look to be super squishy or anything like that. We also have BMX handlebars. So I gotta say, this bike is super refreshing and I like the approach they're taking. Unfortunately, right now in the US market, you're just not gonna see a bike with these components. It's not perfect. I'm noticing a distinct lack of fenders. That's something I always want to see on my bikes. The battery isn't anything special. The rear geometry could certainly be improved. But for a price tag of just over $2,000, I certainly wish more bikes were like this.
Now to look at some fresh, new, cutting-edge designs that, at least right now, you're not going to see in developed markets yet. For me, easily, this bike is my favorite. It's just so simple, yet elegant. And the suspension is actually quality. It's not those generic, no-name, hydraulic forks. But it still does give us the Super 73 aesthetic, which I know a lot of people like. And we have that mid-drive configuration, BPS HD motor. I find it super cool, but maybe because that's the line of thinking I have for my next bike build. I want great suspension, and at this point I'm leaning towards a mid-drive system. And this bike for $2,000 is kind of almost already accomplishing that. So it's very cool. I give it at least +3 cool points for that. And I think potentially my next video is going to be an in-depth discussion of my top final picks for that build. Maybe I can condense it to like a top 3 list. And then I will be explaining my upgrade options as well. Should be a fun video. If you guys want to see that, make sure you are subscribed. And I'll see you guys in the next one.